There's a stone that costs $3, fits in the palm of your hand, and erases a toilet ring in about the time it takes to brush your teeth. But 9 out of 10 people who try it end up scratching their porcelain instead. And I want to explain exactly why. Because the stone works. It genuinely works. I've watched it dissolve a 2-year-old mineral ring in under a minute, the kind of ring that had survived bleach, vinegar, the blue tablets, that foaming gel that smells like a hospital, and roughly 11 hours of scrubbing with a brush that was fraying at the edges. The stone did it on the first try. But the first time I used one, years ago, I scratched a bowl so badly I had to stare at the damage every morning for the next 18 months. The stone wasn't the problem. The technique was. And almost nobody explains the technique correctly, which is why most people try it once, panic, and go back to paying $15 for bottles of bleach that were never going to work in the first place. Before we touch the stone, you need to understand something the cleaning aisle has quietly obscured for about 70 years: the ring. In your toilet isn't a stain in any meaningful sense of the word. A stain is organic: coffee on a shirt, wine on a carpet, grass on a knee. Stains are molecules bonded to fibers, and bleach breaks those molecules apart through oxidation. That's why bleach works on your whites, and why the bathroom industry has spent decades training you to associate that sharp chlorine smell with cleanliness. But the ring sitting just above the waterline in your toilet isn't organic. It's mineral. Specifically, it's calcium carbonate, magnesium compounds, iron oxide, and trace amounts of whatever else is dissolved in your municipal water supply. All of it slowly deposited over months and years as water sits and evaporates at the same exact level day after day, building up a ridge the way a cave builds a stalactite, just a lot faster, because your toilet flushes dozens of times a day and a cave drips once an hour. Bleach cannot oxidize a rock. That's not a controversial claim. That's basic chemistry. You can pour an entire gallon of bleach into that bowl, let it sit overnight, come back in the morning, and find the ring exactly where you left it. Possibly slightly whiter on the surface, because bleach did lighten the biological film growing on top of the mineral. But the ring itself, untouched. This is why you've been scrubbing. This is why the ring comes back within days of cleaning. This is why the bottle on the shelf with the aggressive font and the exclamation points keeps not working. You're using the wrong category of tool. It would be like trying to cut a steak with a spoon and blaming the steak. Roman bathhouses from the 1st century used pumice to clean marble, and archaeologists have pulled pumice stones out of shipwrecks where sailors kept them alongside their razors. The Greeks used it. The Egyptians used it. There's a passage in Pliny the Elder where he recommends pumice for smoothing surfaces that chemical cleaners of his era couldn't touch, which, given that his era's chemical cleaner was basically fermented urine, tells you something about the stone's effectiveness. Pumice is volcanic. When a volcano erupts and the molten rock is suddenly depressurized, dissolved gas inside the magma expands all at once, and the rock cools so fast that those gas bubbles freeze in place, creating a stone that's riddled with microscopic holes, which is why pumice floats, and why it's abrasive without being heavy, and why it can scour a surface without gouging it. Sailors used it for centuries to scrub ship decks. They called the largest pieces holy stones because sailors would kneel on the deck to use them, and the position looked like prayer. 19th century housekeepers used pumice for everything from cleaning cast iron pans to smoothing calluses on their feet to, yes, scouring the inside of the ceramic fixtures that were starting to show up in middle-class American bathrooms. Everybody knew about this stone. It was in every general store. Then, sometime after the Second World War, the chemical cleaner industry exploded. Bottles replaced stones. Marketing replaced technique. And an entire generation grew up believing that the only legitimate way to clean a toilet was to pour something blue into it and hope. Here's the part that makes people swear off pumice forever. They try it once, hear that awful grinding sound, pull the stone back, and find a permanent white haze across their bowl. A matte scratch pattern, right across the pristine finish. It looks like someone took sandpaper to glass, and the assumption is obvious. The stone was too rough, the porcelain was too delicate, the whole idea was a mistake. So the stone goes in the trash, and the person goes back to bleach. But that scratch wasn't caused by the stone being too hard. It was caused by the stone being dry. When pumice is dry, those microscopic air pockets I mentioned are exposed, and the edges of those pockets are effectively tiny blades. Drag that across porcelain and you're not polishing, you're cutting. You're running 1,000 little chisels across a glazed surface that was manufactured to be smooth. It's the same reason you don't sand wood without wetting it if you want a fine finish. Friction plus dry abrasive equals gouging every single time. And there's a second mistake, just as common. People see the ring, grab the stone, and start pressing. Hard. Because that's what scrubbing is, right? Elbow grease. Force. The harder you push, the faster the dirt comes off. That works for a sponge on a dinner plate, but it is exactly wrong for pumice on porcelain. Pressure doesn't accelerate the removal of mineral scale. It just crushes the stone's cellular structure and releases jagged fragments that skid across the glaze. The stone is supposed to do the work. Your hand is supposed to guide it. If you're pushing hard, you're already doing it wrong, and your bowl is going to wear the evidence for the rest of its life. This is where it gets genuinely interesting, because on paper, pumice and porcelain have almost the same hardness rating. And yet one abrades the other without damage, as long as you know the trick. On the Mohs scale, which mineralogists use to rank how hard one material is relative to another, porcelain comes in around 6 to 7. Pumice, depending on the specific volcanic source, sits between 5 and 6. So pumice is actually slightly softer than porcelain, which sounds like it shouldn't work at all. How does a softer stone remove a harder mineral deposit from an even harder ceramic surface? The answer is in those bubbles. Solid pumice would be useless. It'd just slide around. But the bubbles mean that at any given moment, only a tiny percentage of the stone is actually in contact with the surface. All that pressure gets concentrated on microscopic points, and those points can shear off mineral scale without exerting enough force to damage the glazed porcelain underneath. It's the same principle as a snowshoe. Spread the load, avoid sinking in. Pumice spreads your pressure so thin that it only affects the softer material sitting on top, which is exactly what mineral scale is. The scale is softer than both the stone and the porcelain. Calcium carbonate rings in at about 3 on the Mohs scale. Iron oxide, a little higher, but still well below pumice. So when you run the stone across the ring is the softest thing in the equation, and the ring is what gives. But here's the catch. That selectivity only works when the stone is saturated with water. Water fills those bubbles, cushions the contact points, and turns the stone from 1,000 tiny chisels into 1,000 tiny sponges that happen to carry abrasive particles at their edges. A wet pumice stone is polishing. A dry pumice stone is cutting. Same rock. Completely different tool. And the difference between a clean toilet and a ruined toilet is 30 seconds at the faucet. There's another layer to this. The ring itself holds water. If you scrape at a bone-dry ring with a dry stone, you're creating friction on friction. But if the ring is wet, just submerged, doesn't need to be soaking, then the ring becomes slightly softer at its surface. Mineral scale is porous. Water seeps into it. A wet ring abrades faster than a dry ring by a noticeable margin, which means the technique isn't just about wetting the stone. It's about working wet at the waterline, letting the chemistry of the porous mineral cooperate with the chemistry of the porous stone. You're not scrubbing a surface. You're encouraging two wet, porous materials to give up the softer one. Pick up the stone, and before it touches the bowl, soak it under the faucet for a full 30 seconds. Not a quick dunk, a soak, until bubbles stop coming out of it. You'll see them when you submerge it, tiny streams rising from the surface, sometimes for 20 or 25 seconds straight. That's air leaving the pockets. When the bubbles slow to a trickle and the stone feels heavy in your hand, noticeably heavier than when you picked it up, it's ready. Skip this step, and you're going to scratch something. I can't emphasize that enough. The soak is not optional. The soak is the entire technique. While the stone is soaking, look at your toilet bowl. The water level sits at a certain height, and the ring sits just above it. You want the stone to work at the water line, partly wet from the bowl water, not just from the soak. So don't flush first, don't drain anything. Work with the water that's already there. If the ring extends above where the water reaches, you're going to need to wet that section separately, which you can do by dipping the stone and letting it drip along the higher edge of the ring for a few seconds. Now, grip. This is where most tutorials fail you. You do not hold a pumice stone like a scrub brush. You hold it like a pencil you're writing lightly with, thumb and first 2 fingers. The weight of the stone itself, plus maybe an ounce of guidance from your fingers, is all the pressure you need. If your knuckles are white, you're pushing too hard. If your wrist is tense, you're pushing too hard. The stone has to glide. And at the waterline, where it's got bowl water cushioning one side and soak water saturating the other, it will glide in long, sweeping, almost lazy strokes, back and forth along the length of the ring. Within about 10 seconds, you'll see orange or brown residue lifting off into the water. That's your ring. It'll cloud the water around the stone like silt coming off a riverbed. Keep sweeping. Don't stop to inspect. Don't lift the stone and check your progress. Just let it move. After 30 seconds, the cloudiness will thicken. After 60, you'll start seeing porcelain underneath where the ring used to be. By 90 seconds, on most rings, you're done. Flush once, and the bowl underneath will look like it did the day it was installed. Not cleaner than it was. Return to what it was. There's a difference, and you feel it when you see it. If the ring is especially old, we're talking a decade of buildup in a house with hard water. You might need 2 passes. Soak the stone again between passes. Never let it dry out mid-job. And if you feel any scraping, any grinding, any resistance that doesn't feel smooth, stop, re-soak, start again. The stone should never protest. If it's protesting, it's because water has left the bubbles and you're about 15 seconds away from damage. Now, pumice has limits, and pretending it doesn't is how people ruin bathroom fixtures. So here's exactly where it belongs and where it absolutely does not. Pumice is for porcelain toilets with mineral rings. That's its job. It also works on ceramic tile grout lines where mineral deposits have built up, and on the inside of old cast iron cookware if you're trying to reset the surface, though that's a different conversation. It does not belong on acrylic bathtubs. It does not belong on fiberglass shower pans. It does not belong on natural stone, marble, granite, travertine, any of it. It does not belong on glass, on chrome fixtures, on plastic, on enameled steel, or on any surface with a soft finish. A painted finish, or a finish you can scratch with a fingernail. When in doubt, test it in a hidden spot first with the stone fully soaked, using the lightest possible pressure. If the surface clouds at all, stop immediately. Standard precautions apply. Wear gloves if you don't want your hands smelling like toilet water. Ventilate the room and don't mix pumice work with bleach in the bowl, because you'll just be throwing a chemical that doesn't work on top of a tool that does. And if your toilet has an unusual coating or a decorative finish, look it up first. You now know more about cleaning a toilet ring than almost anyone who isn't a professional restoration contractor. And the funny thing is, none of this is secret. It's just forgotten. Pumice has been on hardware store shelves this entire time. $3, sometimes less, usually near the cleaning supplies, sometimes in the pool section, sometimes with the sandpaper. It's been waiting. The only thing that ever stood between you and a clean toilet was the 30 seconds of water and the willingness to let the stone do the work instead of your arm. Go pick one up. Look for a block-shaped pumice stone, not the cosmetic kind with a handle. You want raw, porous, light gray or off-white, the kind that crumbles slightly at the edges when you squeeze it. Soak it, sweep it. Just watch the ring disappear. And if you've got a friend who's been fighting that same ring with bottle after bottle of blue liquid, do them a favor and show them this. Because this is the kind of thing that should have never gotten buried in the first place. A cheap stone, an old technique, and a bathroom that finally stays clean. If recovering this kind of lost, ordinary knowledge is the sort of thing you want more of, stick around. There's plenty more where this came from.